All right, so where were we? We were looking at Hellenistic science. So if you like science and you like time periods where people are discovering new things about the universe, getting more knowledge, this is a fascinating, fantastic time period. A lot of people, I think, will just kind of attribute, scientific knowledge to the Greeks. But, it's not the Athenians who came up with any of this stuff. It's people in later time periods, people like the folks in Alexandria and Pergamon. And of course, if we talk about Alexandria, we've got to talk about the Library of Alexandria and also the Museum of Alexandria. So the Library of Alexandria was, of course, a gigantic library, and basically their goal was to have knowledge of everything, and it would have all the great literature, all the great stories, copies of Homer and the great Greek plays, and it would have, basically all the things that they could figure out from philosophy and science about the universe. And King Ptolemy would be your patron. You could impress him with a new scientific discovery. And then the museum was basically their research institution where all the scholars were. The museum originally means Temple of the Muses. And so, trying to find out the correct proportion of sunlight here. Temple of the Muses became known as the museum. And so the muses are goddesses of inspiration, so they're associated with knowledge and art. Scholarship of literature and scholarship of science are not being thought of as very separate. There's a muse of astronomy, but there's also a muse of epic poetry. And so this was the center of intellectual life in the ancient world, especially during this time period. And it's said that whenever a new ship came into the docks at Alexandria, they would ask the people on the ship to hand over all their scrolls. And then their people at the museum would make copies of the scrolls and give them back the copies, but keep the originals. So by these means, they acquired a library of knowledge that was, trying to find the ultimate collection of knowledge, basically. And they also did original scientific advancements there, writing their own scrolls, their own knowledge. There were scholars there who really developed the understanding of anatomy a lot further, named Herophilus and Erasistratus. They wrote about how anatomy worked. And part of the reason they understood how anatomy worked so well is because the Ptolemies were giving their prisoners to experiment on while they were alive. Known as vivisection. So they would study, how the eye worked and things like that. And it's too unsettling to think about too much. But I do find it kind of interesting that part of our knowledge of anatomy comes from such dubious activities as that. Ptolemy's very pro-knowledge, not necessarily always nice. But you may have heard that the Greeks figured out that the Earth was round and the circumference of the Earth even. And this again happened during this time period. Basically, this guy Eratosthenes, he used triangulation to measure the different angles of shadows. So he had a friend further south in Egypt, and he had himself in Alexandria, and he measured how the shadows changed, basically based on where you were. And he got a pretty reasonable number there. And then he used that to calculate basically the size that the Earth would need to be to have that particular amount of curvature to get the circumference. And so he came up with something that was very much in the ballpark for what it actually is. I think, only off by like a few thousand, when it's like, I don't know, I think it's 30,000 kilometers, and he had like 30,200 or something like that. It was along those lines. But yeah, lots of great astronomy going on this time period. In fact, this is connected to one of the coolest things that we have found in this time period, which is called the Antikythera mechanism. So this was a machine that Greeks had built that was almost like a proto-computer, using lots of different gears to measure the movements of the planets and the stars. Mostly the constellations in the sky, where they would be at specific time periods, but it could also keep track of the movements of the planets, the sun, and the moon in the sky. It could keep track of the when all the Olympic Games were going to be, every 4 years. It had all these systems figured out. and was basically just doing it all by a series of extremely complicated gears that kept everything in relationship to each other, which is super cool. And would have originally been kind of like a rectangular object that people carried around with them. We found now a few different examples of this type of device, meaning it was something that upper class people would have had access to, is creations like this one. Maybe not all of them, but a few of them. And so, it's another sign of just an interest in astronomy. And this was a time period where Greeks really tried to figure out how did the universe work. And there was a debate between a heliocentric model of the universe where the sun was at the center and a geocentric model where the earth was at the center. And as we know, the heliocentric model is the correct one and it works better. But it's hard to really believe that just from your intuition alone if you don't have any like direct evidence of it. If you're not used to it, you would probably think that the sun is moving around in the sky, not that the earth is moving. And so their heliocentric and geocentric models were a little weird. For instance, they kind of imagined that planets were like jewels set into glass spheres. Like imagine a series of glass spheres, and then the planet is like a jewel that's in that sphere, and it sort of goes rotating around because the sphere is rotating. That was the theory there. So they didn't have everything perfectly worked out. And ultimately, geocentrism was more popular, but it is interesting that some people did propose heliocentrism. One of the great scholars and scientists of this time period is known as Archimedes. Archimedes being this famous inventor. One thing he invented was the pump, basically a special kind of pump known as an Archimedes screw that just has a spiral moving up along it. And the invention of this device allowed people to pump water and like move vast quantities of grain around much more effectively. So he had some pretty practical uses to that. He was also very speculative. He had some ideas for like, you could use a mirror to set enemy ships on fire, or like a giant claw that like grabs them and disrupts them. He had all sorts of clever ideas like that. And of course, the kings were very interested in concepts like this. It's possible that the Hellenistic era could have invented steam power and had the Industrial Revolution, only it never quite happened. And I think a big part of that is because kings were interested in things like this, that they could see direct evidence that was useful to them, and not in things like steam where there was no clear evidence to them that it would be useful in any way. Little did they know. But yeah, that's science, and Archimedes is a great character. Story goes that he was too busy trying to solve a math problem when Roman soldiers arrested him, and they just killed him because he wouldn't get out of their way. He was too busy working on his math problem. Another story is that he was trying to figure out how to tell if a king's crown was genuine. Like, was it just gold on the outside and lead on the inside? He needed a way to be able to figure this out. And then he was in the bath one day, and he realized that, everything of the same size displaces the same amount of water, and that's how you know what its volume is, but its weight is going to differ, and by comparing the two, you figure out what its mass is, and that's how you can tell if a crown is made of lead or made of gold. And the story is that he jumped out of the bathtub shouting, "Eureka, Eureka," and ran around the city shouting, "Eureka," still stark naked, which means I have found it. Okay, so that's Hellenistic science. What's going on in Hellenistic religion? We had the traditional religion of the Greek gods. In this time period, things tend to evolve. Think about the themes we're talking about. Life is chaotic, and you want things to be okay. That's the big theme of the Hellenistic world. In this religion, you have an emphasis on gods who love you a lot and can take care of you, and special knowledge that's going to ensure that everything is okay for you if you do the right things. There was this long tradition in Athens of the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter, this special religion around Demeter that was very secretive, but if you did it, you were promised that you would get some kind of better afterlife. This is kind of one of the earliest of these types of religions that are known as mystery religions, for these sort of kinds of secret knowledge. And basically they just become more and more popular during this time period, and spread further than Demeter. Another big one is the religion of Dionysus, and that becomes really popular in this time period. In the religion of Dionysus, we found all these tablets that describe special things you're supposed to do, special things you're supposed to say, and then when you die, you'll have to like follow a special path and say the right words, and then that will unlock the path to Dionysus's paradise for you. And we know some of this from the art that we find of Dionysus and his partner Ariadne, and some texts that we found as well. This vase seems to have been involved in that religion. And there's a story that Dionysus is like this heir to Zeus, but part of him, but he was like torn into pieces, and now part of him lives in every human being. And there's all sorts of weird and interesting stuff like that that is not quite like Greek religion has ever been before. Another one for the new religion is the gods at Samothrace, also known as the Kabiri or Kaberoi. And this was a religion that was already pretty popular with Macedonians. And one of the cool things about it was that it was open to everyone across the whole world. It didn't matter whether you were a barbarian or a Greek, a rich, poor, slave even, you could worship these great gods. And so this idea of a universal religion, instead of just, the gods of Greece, now it's like everybody is part of the same thing. Everybody can be part of the same thing. That's a philosophy they call cosmopolitan, looking more than just your city. Cosmopolitan means cosmos, the universe, city, so your city is the universe. I mentioned the Ptolemies came up with their Isis and Serapis gods that kind of fused Isis and Demeter and Osiris with Hades, and kind of with Zeus and some other stuff as well. And kind of made this new religion that they were associated with that would appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians. We don't know how deliberate it was, how accidental it was, but traditionally the story is that they did it on purpose to kind of promote their own power. And this religion became very popular. And in fact, Isis became so popular herself that she, by Roman times, was way more popular than Serapis. That she was just someone you would pray to in and of herself. There's a famous story written in Roman times about Isis, where the religion of Isis was getting more and more popular. And in this story, Isis describes herself. The story is all about this guy who got turned into a donkey, and he only gets turned back by the goddess Isis at the very end. And here's how Isis describes herself. I, the natural mother of all life, the mistress of the elements, the first child of time, the supreme divinity, the queen of those who in hell, the first among those in heaven, the uniform manifestation of all the gods and goddesses, I who govern by my nod the crests of light in the sky, the purifying wafts of the ocean, and the lamentable silences of Hades, I whose single godhead is venerated all over the earth under manifold forms, varying rites and changing names. So this is pretty wild. The Greeks have taken their tendency to interpret other people's gods as their own, which is called syncretism. And they have basically come up with this concept, well, Greeks and Romans have come up with this concept that all the other gods and goddesses are just Isis in disguise. She is the universal god, and she will protect you from anything. She will save you at all times. All you need to do is reach out with her. So she's a god for everybody, instead of just for Greeks. And she can help you with any problem, which in a time period that's very stressful might be the kind of goddess that you'd want to pray to. You pray to her for protection and to take care of you. And unlike Zeus, who's just messing around, being kind of a jerk, Isis really loves people and wants to take care of them. So that seems to be the big thing that people are seeking from their religion more and more during this time period is, a god or goddess that's going to provide some kind of stability and feeling like things are going to be okay. And one more I want to mention is Tyche. Tyche is just the goddess of fortune. In Rome, she's known as Fortuna. And she is Lady Luck. And in a time period where you might not feel lucky all the time, you pray to her for good fortune, to have happily ever after. So she can go against the fates. She can make good things happen to you, whatever you need, whatever problems you have. So again, very kind of appealing goddess for a chaotic time period where things are very uncertain. And mainly you want protection. You want to be like, okay, make sure that army from the Ptolemies doesn't come and burn down my crops. And your prayers will hopefully be answered. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to think about here, and it shows that what people were looking for in their religion was evolving. Okay, next I want to talk about Hellenistic philosophy, because I think we'll find that the philosophical ideas in this time period go along very similar lines to the religion. And then finally, we'll finish up by looking at the literature, the stories that they're telling during this time period, and how does that fit into these ideas we've been talking about. All right, I'll see you in the next video.